Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with Oscar Munoz, who is the former chairman and CEO of United Airlines, author of a new book, Turnaround Time. Oscar, welcome.
Well, thank you. Nice to see you as well. Thank you for doing this.
I remember you being the CEO who got a heart attack 38 days into the job. How did that change your mindset?
I think one of the misconceptions that people have about organ transplants writ large is that it does change you. I think it certainly gives you a perspective, a different perspective on life. But from who I am and who I was, it continues to be the same person. So there's so many stories that I talk about that going through some horrendous experience like that for not only myself, but importantly for my family. Why would you go back to work? Why would you go back into the fray? You put yourself in physical danger because as transplant patients are immunosuppressed. And so I learned all the COVID-like precautionary issues that we all learned a few years later, way back in 2016. So I was old hat at some of that. But again, the perspective of me as a leader did not necessarily change, other than from a human perspective, being aware of what people have gone through. And importantly, especially in this next chapter of my life, how do you get back in that space through the various things that I'm doing?
Well, it's interesting you jumped straight ahead to the heart transplant, which I know was several months later. And I was starting at the heart attack. Did you that to me is a moment where you certainly feel your mortality. Were you optimistic? Because you were also at that point interviewing, people, including somebody who turned out to be your successor. Were you planning to stay on the job just to start at the very start of your tenure? Were you ever worried that you'd have to step down?
I was not. Pretty much everyone else around me, including the medical community, was not optimistic. The history doesn't show well. I think my family, my kids in particular, who will talk to you today about, it's like, you don't know my dad. He'll be back. Unfortunately, the situation was pretty serious. Luckily, I did not know that, so I never really had any reservations about returning. It was a situation where I was healthy beforehand, and I think a lot of folks that have difficulties coming back from either a heart attack or a transplant is that they've had a lifelong sort of illness. I was fortunate to not have that, so I was healthy. I had just ridden a 100-mile bike race a couple of weeks before. I was a vegan, and the thing I talk about a lot from a PSA perspective is how it's the largest killer in America because people ignore the symptoms and don't think of themselves as having a heart attack because it's such internal plumbing, and so that you have to be aware of. And so it is it is not a part of a turnaround leadership business strategy that I would it's like, hey, you should have a heart attack, recover from it, get a transplant, and that'll give you a really good foundation to lead a company forward.
Well,
Would
I
not be
mean,
the direction I would provide, but indeed it did serve that purpose to a degree with the story of turnaround and its people.
well, I know for turnaround time, a lot of the focus is on the employees, and certainly you came into a very disgruntled workforce when you took over in 2015. I mean, if you were to distill the lessons, because every situation is different. Looking back, what do you think you did especially well during that period?
I talk a lot about this. I like to break down things into simple words just because people remember them more. But the first one is to listen and learn, and then only can you lead. Especially in a turnaround situation, there's just so many things that are broken, right? That's why it's being dubbed a turnaround situation. The trick I've learned in having done this before at various scales is the thing you pick first is a really important indicator of your potential success. And to get to the core of what could be the first thing you do is you have to get really good information. And good information, it means not what people bring you, but it means what you glean for yourself and your instinct and your awareness. And so for me, I relied on things from my heritage and my upbringing to just my general business instinct to connect with people that actually do the work and get their viewpoint, and then match that up against what all the really smart consultants and outside people and internal people talk about. And
So what
so
did you do
I think
first?
the concept of listen and learn and then only lead.
Yep.
And then the second one I would add quickly is this concept of proof, not promise. People are so used to the world promising them things and never delivering on them, and that creates a level of distrust, which would be the thing. Trust is everything, as we all know, in everything that we do. So listening and learning, providing proof that not just promise what you're going to change, builds a level of trust, which builds a level of discretionary effort in a workplace that actually wants and it makes people that give you service to actually want to do that service in a friendly way, not being told to do that.
So what was the first thing, what was the big thing that you picked and focused on? Was it the union contracts, the pilots? What would you say? You said pick one thing. What was your one thing?
So there was, as I said earlier, many options. Everything was broken. I think in the course of my conversations, I went on a listening tour. And I went to every nook and cranny of every airport, and that includes the hangars where we maintained the things overnight. So all hours of the day, it was a kind of a 24/7 sort of full blown. Went to every one of the major hubs and a lot of stations along the way, and to ask the very simple question, like, "Tell me what's wrong," you know. So we chronicle a few of those things in the book. Very angry, almost mob-like mentality in some places, to quiet bouts of despair and depression in certain people. I talk about people hugging and kissing and saying hello, but holding on to your coat just a little longer, or that look that lingers that just says, we need help. And so part of this concept of listening is not just what you hear and truly, but understand the mechanics and the body language that surrounds you. And so, it was an important part for me to go listen to those things, but careful what you ask for. So I'm going through this tour and getting all of this incredible information, all of this emotion. I see many things. There wasn't anything jumping to the forefront that was the thing. And I began to get a little nervous because everybody's expecting for you to go out and do this mission. And most people are expecting you to fail. It's like, what the hell is he going to find out? He's going to find out the same thing we all know. So on a fateful flight from Denver back to Chicago, I went up to the galley and to reach out to the flight attendant that was there. Her name is Amy Sue. And again, the concept of listening. She did not want to yes, can I help you? Was the very formal reply. It's like, hi, I'm Oscar. I know who you are. It was just kind of that chilly frostiness. But I could tell, like everyone else that I was listening to, she had a lot to say. So I just gently reached out and touched her on her forearm, and just a little gentle squeeze that said, listen, I'm here and I'm willing to listen, but I don't need to force you to do that. She turned, looked at me, burst out in tears, broke down, and just said, Oscar, I'm just tired of always having to say, I'm sorry. And I don't know why that struck me so hard, but I had spent countless hours and days listening to people and all their various things. But it just boiled to the thing. It's like, God, that's what it is. We put our people in an impossible situation to do this wonderful, friendly, be the friendly skies, be the brand, all these sorts of things. But we're making their life miserable because when she says sorry, it's sorry the plane is late, not her job. Sorry the coffee sucks, not her decision. Sorry you can't do this. Sorry you can't do that, right? It's constantly, and you have no control over it. And over time, could you see yourself just like, what? I'm living at the whim of others and taking all the brunt while they go around and say whatever they say, they being senior folks. And I represented the very basis of that. And it was a seminal and watershed moment for the company because right then and there, I knew what the first thing was going to be, which was to regain the trust of our employees so they could indeed understand and listen where we wanted to go and be supportive of it, because it's such a decentralized workforce, right? That flight attendant dealing with you specifically on one flight of the day, there is no oversight. There's no camera or audio version of how she treats you or doesn't treat you or how you feel like you're being treated. That only comes from a genuine desire to do that. How to capture that was the first big thing we decided. Now, I came to that conclusion. I had to convince a lot of other people, obviously, to do that.
But if they're apologizing for the quality of the airline, so you had to focus really on improving the core quality so people weren't ashamed of where they worked. Is that how you would, or is that too simplistic?
No. I think it is one of many symptoms. I write about the fact that, I spoke to one person who was so angry. He says, when somebody asks me what I do, I prefer to tell them I'm unemployed rather than to say I work at United. So, this is the concept of this listening and learning thing that it's so much. It's like this wasn't just going to be fixed by a couple of nice notes or even solving a union contract, which had to be done, of course. But before all of that, I felt I had to connect with them in a way that was very different. We had several CEOs over the course of the last decade at United. So, they also get tired of that. Somebody new shows up. Yeah, he or she's going to do this or that. And then it's just the same old, same old. And I had to make sure that was different. So that was the approach. And the first big thrust was the regaining their trust.
Yep. You came from, I know it was at the railroad industry. I know you'd spent time at PepsiCo. Do you think it helped to have been an outsider?
I think yes and no. If I knew then what I know now, would I have done the same thing? I think the listening tour, yes. But I think from a business perspective, I was a bit naive on some of the more very detailed, specific industry aspects. So I was clearly an outsider. But to your question, the concept of vulnerability by saying, "Gosh, I don't know what you mean by that." It cuts both ways. People say, well, "What the hell? This guy doesn't know anything about this industry." I think somebody wrote, "It's like, what is United? Hey, I'm all for really nice guys. We're going to do all this stuff, but when are they going to hire someone that actually knows how to run an airline?" But what helped, to your question, was simply the fact that it allowed me a way to get into people and to get their viewpoints where they felt free to share. Because it was, okay, Oscar, let me explain how this works. And in that process of me learning, I could ask questions back. People felt engaged and valued. It's like, oh, I'm teaching the CEO about this, as opposed to the harsh, wow, he doesn't know this. How can he be in charge? And so proving to people, and it's a lot of the book, proving to people that you don't have to be everything to everyone, but you do have to be the source of their inspiration and drive in a company that was in the state that it was. It wasn't about strategy at the time. It was about the human dynamics that support a customer-based business.
It's interesting when you talk about what you felt you were naive on. I often think of your leadership, the airline, when I think about the time of social media that we live in. And I go back to that incident, April 2017, when the passenger was dragged off a flight, not by you, of course, but I know that the response, your initial response, did get some blowback. What did you learn from that? Because we're in a period right now where every flight has so many people taking videos of angry passengers. I saw another one just 2 nights ago. I mean, because that was a very public incident. Any thoughts?
Oh yeah, no thoughts on that whatsoever. Yes,
well,
it was obviously a very seminal moment for many reasons, but at the same time, the civility and lack of genuine discourse writ large, not just on aviation, is something that plagues our nation. And I think that's a troubling thing for all of us to consider, because as I learned somewhere along the way, I read that all great civilizations first fall apart from within. And I fear that over the last 10 or so years, we kind of are in that mode. So I always worry about that. And I share that with people just as a thought that, this isn't just us being divided politically. There is a level of history that says, the Romans imploded from within, right? And as did the Greek. And so are we headed down that path? So that's a broader conversation. To your specific point, gosh, so many learnings. We could go on to the fact that social media was not a big thing at the time, which is hard to imagine that in 2017, like, wow, that was just yesterday. Well, it was light years away from a technological acceptance. So you understood what Twitter did, and then you didn't realize we didn't realize we didn't have an organization that understood social media. So my initial, responses on that medium, were almost insignificant to us as we were determining that, because it's like, oh yeah, it's like a bunch of people.
Your
that are on
initial
the internet
response
kind of
was
doing
to
this thing.
support the employees, basically, right? I mean,
Right.
I want to just remind people this was a passenger. The flight was overbooked. He didn't want to get off, and he was dragged off the plane. And your initial response was that. You tell me what your initial response was, because then your second response was different from your first one.
Yeah. So the first response, and you use the right term, because somebody initially responded that it was an overbooking situation. Overbooking in our world is a hot topic item because it's bound with regulatory issues. So the smart people around the room, it's like, wow, we shouldn't have said the word overbooked. So the term reaccommodated entered the lexicon.
Yes, which
and
you lost me at hello
like,
with that one.
Right. I mean, it's like, you're watching a human being get dragged and beaten. Okay, not by United employees, but nevertheless, and you're using the term reaccommodated. What an idiot, right? And I think that the key learning is, I should have sat and watched that video until I got sick to my stomach. And of course, I would have used a different term. But things move at the speed of light, right? Oh my God, Twitter's coming alive, and we got to respond quickly. And but more importantly, there was so many circumstances. It wasn't United Airlines or its employees that did that. The passenger himself had a little bit of a different past. So all of that came to light. And as we got the reports, it was the instinct was to paint the passenger in a bad light and support our employees who didn't really do anything. They were just doing the right thing. And of course, that just made things even worse. And so the next learning is it's never too late to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so prepared to go on TV a day later. And in that preparation, trying to figure out how to best tell that story that, frankly, it wasn't United. It wasn't United employees. And while we're sorry it happened, kind of how do you best tell that story to a very broad national and expectant audience? Because I was the topic du jour for sure, not just here, but all over the world. And so I think what I talk about from probably my most key learning is that there are points in the life of a leader and decision maker where there truly is, there's no one else in the room, and it is lonely at the top, and the buck stops here, and all those different phraseology. You don't really understand them until you're in the midst of this, because laying in bed late that night, early that morning, trying to figure out exactly how I was going to say what I was going to say, it quickly became evident that my upbringing, the people that surround me, who I am as a person, none of that person was going to be represented in the words that I was being asked to say. And I talk about, falling to my knees and looking above, not because I'm a pious person necessarily, but there's a lot of people. I talk a lot about my maternal grandmother and who she was, and what would she have done? And she would not have blamed anyone. She would have not run from this. She would not. And so I had a calming sort of sense when I got up and took a shower and went to the studio for the presentation. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say, but I was pretty sure I wasn't going to say what I'd been sort of coached and trained to do. So when the question was asked, I said, and I remember the exact words, I let the policies and procedures of this company get in the way of doing the right thing for another human, and that should never happen.
Yeah, I think.
And the funny, if I could, just the funny part,
course,
the audible noise in her headset, because they're expecting me to start spinning, right? Well, you got to understand, and this and that. So they're poised for that. The louder gaps was my team behind me, who was like, wait, he's not supposed to say that. But my decision was simply, you know what? No one's going to believe anything else. Practical. It's done. I've stepped into it. Let me just step into it more and take it on. Mm-hmm. And then let's put things in place to fix it. A. B, a spin or a story that purportedly changes people's mind is not going to happen. But I also have to remember what I said for the rest of my life, because it's always going to be asked.
Yep.
And who I am as a person is not one that's going to make those things up. So I just went with the best thing that I could say and do, and a lot of push and blowback on that for some point in time, but it passed. We did the right things. And the leadership lesson is, when something's gone wrong, it's never the act, but the attempt at the cover up, as we all know the word, I just didn't want to go there. And I had a lot of my personal heritage and upbringing that really supported that decision for me.
Let me respect and ask about your personal upbringing. You're the eldest of 10. Talk about, obviously, held up as a, I don't know, do we say Latino leader? I think if he's the son of immigrants, but how do you talk about your heritage and how that's shaped you as a leader, if that's the right way to put it?
Yeah, no, I think it is. And I think the book Throughline has a little bit of that diversity and inclusion messaging that's not overt and in your face. It's like, here's a person, normal human, grew up in very humble circumstances, immigrant story to some degree, a lot of wonderful accidents along the way that propelled me to where I am. And I'm living proof that, somebody that is different than everyone else can actually not only succeed in business, but do a lot of good things for a lot of people, which my legacy at United is that, there's 100,000 human beings that just feel better about themselves. By the way, you mentioned the oldest of 10. I always have a little bit of joke since I had the heart transplant. I'm actually, well, chronologically that may be correct. Metaphorically, I'm hashtag youngest child.
You've got a young heart.
What's now a 35-year-old heart, which would make me the youngest in our family. But no, I think the conversation about my upbringing, growing up with my grandmother across the border, without my mom, without ever knowing my dad, and the formative years of going from home to home, because my grandmother did not have her own home, but wasn't homeless, because in the Latino world, Latin world, however you term it, familia, the term family, is a deeply, almost religious belief that you help other people. So as difficult as the circumstances were for me in hindsight, I had that strong hand of my maternal grandmother that held me over all those long journeys. I never felt anything but support and love and caring. And so that has always stood with me. My grandmother in particular, she ended up being a maid at the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas for many years and retired at 86 and never complained, never missed a day of work, despite some physical ailments that I described that were horrendous that she never complained about. So when you have a foundation of an individual and a principle and a spirit of working with others, that is your backdrop like that, it's hard to not be influenced and balanced. I always kid that some of my worst days at work were probably some of her better days and the things that she do. And if we're ever know each other and we're traveling, we're walking down a hotel hallway and you see me tear up a little bit when I see the various ladies that are cleaning the rooms, that comes from a very deep place for me.
I want to ask I'm an immigrant from the North, I'm from Canada, and I've personally found it heartbreaking, the zeitgeist shift against immigrants, and it's especially been harsh with, immigrants of color, Latinos, Latinx, whatever. Like it. How do you feel about that? I hate the term diversity. You can often lose people at hello, but U.S. has always been a mecca for talent from around the world. How, from where you sit, you're on many boards, you're obviously writing books. What do you see as the shift?
I think the shift has been that as the population of, for lack of a better term, minorities has grown, I think the risk that it poses to Americans that were born here, as we like to say, and I say that in that harsh tone because that's the harsh divisiveness. Everybody is an immigrant, right? By and large in this country.
Exactly.
We've just forgotten that we came from different places, and you get a generation or two in, and now you're here, and you don't accept. We forget the value that this nation and this democratic way of life has afforded so many people. And despite the bias that has grown over time for many reasons, political or otherwise, that have been fomented by people, all that kind of stuff that you go through, we're forgetting the basic facts around this. So I try not to be overly emotional, and it's hard because of my upbringing. Of course, he's going to be supportive of this. Of course, he's going to take that view. But I've really made it a point, along with some partners, about educating the world about the Latino and Latina community in America, first of all, you can think of them as big and growing. They are 20% versus 13% African Americans, so they've grown. They're also more affluent than they used to be, more educated. They vote, and from an economic perspective, and we do a study on this every year. If you measured the economic viability of the Latino cohort in America, it would, if you measured it in GDP-like measurements, it becomes the seventh largest nation in the world by its economic power, all inside the United States. So when we speak to capital allocators, CEOs that run companies and industries, like this ain't a brown thing, this ain't a gimme thing, this is a business thing.
Yeah.
Your major growth is predicated on this Latino community being your main customer or larger and growing customers. Why wouldn't you run advertising that involves them? Why wouldn't you listen to them and build products because one thing you learn about the Latino community, it is loyal, it's technologically savvy, it's leading edge, and so we put all the reports out there. So I think of it in that regard, that it's a strong and vibrant community that can do a lot of good. Immigration specifically, again, facts. The aging of our population is growing, and the growing base of millennials and Gen Z and Gen X happens to be infinitely more diverse than you thought, and because of the size, largely Latino. And then the world, our economy has run for so long with this immigrant sort of workforce that has done so many of the jobs that, I know that people like to say, whoa, they're taking our jobs. It's like, there's no one in America.
No, I think it's the secret sauce.
Right. We know. So we're facing a crisis in the workplace where we're going to have less and less workers because you're restricted. So is there a thoughtful bridging of viewpoints that allows immigrants from, not just because Mexico gets the brunt of it because that's the nation they come, but as you know, the journey starts way in South America, and they make that trek for such a long period to the promised land only to be turned back. I think there's viable solutions that can take into account the facts that impact our nation, workforce, for instance, that can be done. And if we looked at it from that perspective, as opposed to, they're taking our job, or they look different, they don't speak the language, all those things can happen. But I didn't speak the language. I came across the border in a time where there was no border crossing. I grew up my entire life with any formal documentation until I had to go back. And I'm not ashamed of it because I was ignorant. I didn't know I wasn't anything. But again, I think I've been a good and productive citizen to this great nation. And there's many, many people out there like that we are forbidding from coming because we're into this emotional, non-fact discussion about, they're taking our jobs and that anger that comes with it.
No, I've always thought it's the secret sauce. Look, I know that we could clearly talk all day. People should buy the book. I do want to ask you about your own purpose. You stepped down after 5 years. You probably, some people stay 10, some people stay less. What do you see as your particular role as a leader right now? I know you're on some boards, you're speaking. What keeps what's driving you?
You probably just heard one of my pitches, right? The concept of giving back to my heritage and my community, where I haven't been able to really, as a public company official, everything you say gets taken out of context. It becomes personal, and it becomes muted. And now I'm free to roam around the world. So I support the Latino community, not by asking for things. So underrepresented minorities get very little private equity and venture capital money. So we raised our own venture capital fund, and we're supporting Latino and Latina founders. So that's just like, I'm not going to wait for anyone. We're going to do it. We're going to provide this proof.
Would you run for office, Mr. Munoz, or no?
I don't think so. I think I can be much more impactful in many ways in supporting and guiding and advising. And I've been asked to do many things, including that. I just don't know that that's the restrictions that are in place right now, that it wouldn't frustrate me more, and I think I can get more done in that regard. But there's so many issues that help. Health issues I'm involved in heavily with regards to bringing awareness to heart health in particular. And then, there's just so much great need and so much divide. So lending my voice and whatever discourse there is out there to try to bridge the gap, regardless of the topic, so that we can become once again a wonderful, great nation of different views, but of the love for democracy and the American way.
Let me
like
end.
A pitch, sorry.
No. Listen, I think you've got a wonderful portfolio of activities. Let's give some final takeaway thoughts, perhaps to other leaders. Doesn't have to be within the airline sector, but this is, whether it's economic headwinds, polarized climate, etc. What do you think is sort of the first principles that you'd like people to either take away from the book or for leaders to think about to succeed in this environment? In 30 words or less.
I'm sure. Specifically with the concept of surviving in this environment, I think we are in a very turbulent and disruptive state. The turbulence in the economy is cyclical, always has been. Mm-hmm. And so I think we should be mindful of that in our decisions. I think with regards to how we act and work accordingly, I think it's easy to cut the workforce and do all those sorts of things. And some of it needs to be done for sure. But it's also an amazing opportunity. I learned, in the Japanese language, the term crisis is two symbols. It's the symbol of danger and the symbol of opportunity together. And that always resonated with me because in the time of a crisis, there's opportunity. And so at United, you see us ordering, 700 aircraft and two per week deliveries, knowing that this is cyclical and the world will come back. And so to be bold is certainly the cycle will end. How do you prepare yourself for how it's coming out? And then on the disruptive end, because technology is changing everything, and we can be resistant to it, we can avoid it, we can decide we don't want to participate. But it's time to embrace. And what are the things that you can do in these downturns to invest for the future? So be active, be bold, know it's cyclical, don't despair, and more importantly, make sure your organization knows of your positivity towards the future, and they will accept it, and they will abide by it, and it will actually drive you even a better culture when you come out of this, because this too shall pass.
I think that can't think of a better place to end than there. Oscar Munoz, thank you very much for joining us. The book is Turnaround Time, and good luck. Look forward to continuing the conversation.